Hello, everybody. I'm Rich Prater. I'm going to be your host today. We're on episode one today on the program that I like to call the Free Exchange of Ideas, which is, in my opinion, one of the biggest things that our country, the United States, was founded on was the free exchange of ideas. This stuff is very important, in my opinion. That's why I decided to name the show that. Today, we're going to be talking about the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment actually got started in 1866, which was about a year after the end of the Civil War and about a year after President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And it didn't get ratified into the Constitution until 1868 under President Andrew Johnson. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go through the 14th Amendment. Bonnie's has decided to read for us today, and we're going to go through all of it, and then we're going to put our free exchange of ideas out there. Now, nobody knows where any of us stand, whether it be me, Annie, or Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis is a good personal friend of mine who is actually a lawyer. Everybody knows who Annie Oakley is, so I don't even think I really need to put her out there, but we're here today, and we're going to go through this amendment. All right. So anybody that wants to contact me, by the way, anybody's interested in coming on the show, anybody wants to come on here to debate or just talk about any subject matter pertaining to the United States, contact me. I'll contact you back. We'll see if we can not get you on here. So the 14th Amendment. Bonnie, if you could start reading, please.
Yeah, we're going to start with an overview of the 14th Amendment. This is a summary. The 14th Amendment, post-Civil War, granted citizenship to all people born or naturalized in the U.S., including formerly enslaved people, and guaranteed all citizens equal protection of the laws and due process from state governments, meaning states can't deny rights or unfairly treat people. It essentially made the Bill of Rights apply to states and is the basis for major civil rights rulings, ensuring rights for all Americans, regardless of race or origin, and applying federal protections at the state level. So here is the official 14th Amendment, Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction equal protection of the laws. Simplified, that means it's a citizenship clause. Anyone born or naturalized in the U.S. is a citizen, ending debates like Dred Scott. Section 2. Representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. But when the right to vote at any election for the choice of electors for President and Vice President of the United States, representatives in Congress, the executive and judicial officers of a state, or the members of the legislature thereof is denied to any of the male inhabitants of such state, being 21 years of age and citizens of the United States, or in any way abridged except for participation in rebellion or other crime, the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the proportion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. Section 2 simplified is a due process clause. States can't take away life, liberty, or property without fair legal procedures, extending federal rights to states. An additional impact is that it addresses voting rights. Section 2 ties representation in Congress to voting rights for men, penalizing states that deny suffrage. Section 3. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. Simplified, this is an equal protection clause. States must treat everyone equally under the law, preventing discrimination. Additionally, it bars insurrectionists. Section 3 disqualifies former Confederate officials from holding office. Section 4. The validity of the public debate of the United States, authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, shall not be questioned. But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss of emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. Simplified, it's a punishment for rebellion, barred former Confederates from office. Additionally, it validates federal debt. Section 4 ensures federal debt, but not Confederate debt, is honored. Section 5, the Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Simplified, its enforcement. It gave Congress power to pass laws to enforce the amendment. And additionally, it empowers Congress. Section 5 grants Congress the power to enforce the amendment. Historical significance and use post-Civil War, it enacted to protect formerly enslaved people and ensure civil rights. And then it has also been used in landmark cases. It forms the basis for rulings in Brown versus the Board of Education, Loving versus Virginia, which involved interracial marriage, Obergefell versus Hodges, which is same-sex marriage, and Roe versus Wade, which is abortion rights.
Okay. It's quite a mouthful there. Thanks, Bonnie. That was great. If I could start, which first of all, I believe that this amendment should be abolished because I don't think it pertains to our times anymore. You know, slavery ended during the Civil War in the 1860s. Okay, and that's basically what it was written for, was because of the slaves that the South had, and now they became citizens, and it also protected their children. So that really don't pertain. The main idea of the amendment really doesn't pertain to today. We don't have slavery in this country anymore, you know, but the problem that we have with immigration in this country is very significant and very serious. And it's been very serious for decades. Of course, under the Joe Biden administration, it got about 30 times worse. Now we're getting it back in check a little bit, but look at what it's costing. Look at what it's costing taxpayers. And some of these people that have come here, they've murdered people, they've done horrible things. I'm not saying they're all horrible, but I'm just a big believer that if somebody wants to come to this country just to have their child so they can get citizenship, no, unacceptable in my opinion. Okay, we're $38 trillion in debt. We don't need to keep adding on to that. I know Mr. Davis knows how sensitive I am about the national debt, our conversations over the years. But it goes a little bit further than that, a little bit more than that, all right? Again, this amendment pertained to post-Civil War, late 1860s when it was ratified. I don't believe that it's needed anymore. I believe that this amendment should be abolished. Another thing that you deal with a lot of illegal immigration is they don't come here to embrace the United States, which that's what immigration was all about. Like during the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s, early 1900s, so many Europeans come here and they thrived and they loved the United States. And But a lot of these illegal immigrants that come here, they could not care, they don't care anything about the United States. I'm trying to use the right language here. And I didn't say all of them, but a lot of them. They don't embrace our free exchange of ideas, and they make money here in the United States. They send it back to their family. They do it for 10 years, and then they can go back to their homeland and retire. And I mean, we can't do that. All right. I mean, I'm going to probably be working until I can't work anymore. And, you know, it just isn't fair. It isn't fair to the people of this country. We need, in my opinion, we need to be worrying about America and America's citizens, not be worrying about everybody else. We have enough problems here. So with that, I'm going to see who wants to take the helm next. Does Andy want to do it, or does Mr. Davis?
I'd be happy to jump in here.
Please.
Can we get the text of section 1 up?
Of course. All right. Let me. You said section 1, Mr. Davis?
Yes, sir.
There you are, sir.
So, you know, as a lawyer, I would just assume two things. One, that I'm not here to talk about the politics or policy. And two, to assume, which is true, that this is currently a part of the United States Constitution. So it's just a matter of working within that framework. The important line here, to double click on your point about immigration and specifically birthright citizenship, there's an important clause here, and this is one that the Trump administration's legal team has focused on in this term, and that is, after all persons born or naturalized in the United States, quote, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States. This clause here, and I'm certainly not an expert in this particular issue, but this clause, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, presumably had meaning. If it were just to mean that you're born here and therefore you become a citizen, that clause would be unnecessary. We have a doctrine and legal interpretation that you do not add more language than is necessary to give something its meaning. So what does that mean? I think the argument is that it is meant to exclude certain persons, namely, like to pick a very specific group, that would be people that are diplomats and their children. They are not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States if they are at an embassy. The Trump administration would also argue, and I think it's credible, that does not include people that are unlawfully here or that are here on a temporary basis. So I do think that that's a compelling argument to remove birthright citizenship. I'm not someone who's, arguing that we should repeal the 14th Amendment like you are, but I do think it's important to interpret it according to its natural meaning. And I think you have to get into that second clause.
And I'm sorry, did you want me to go to the next section?
To me, section 1 contains pretty much all of the all of what's really pertinent to today's legal issues. I mean, I guess I could move on to other portions here that are some of the more controversial provisions, or those that have been the focus of extensive litigation over the past century. One of which would be the due process clause, which is towards the middle of the end there, quote, nor shall any state.
The due process clause. There you go.
Right. Yeah. So the problem with the due process clause has been the development of this doctrine in the Supreme Court called substantive due process, which, to quote Justice Scalia, substantive due process is a contradiction in terms. Substantive due process would include such things as the right to an abortion, or more broadly, the right to privacy. Due process, I think that has to be defined first. I think it's essentially defined here in this slide. Fair legal procedures, right? If you're going to be put to death, you're going to be put to a firing squad, or you need to be convicted by a jury of your peers. That would be an important component of due process. Substantive due process is this idea that there are certain rights that are substantive, which is to say your right to an abortion, that there is no process that could strip you of that right. That is where the 14th Amendment and its interpretation at the Supreme Court has gotten just way out of hand and very mischievous. It gives 9 lawyers that we call justices on the Supreme Court the opportunity to define rights that have never been voted upon, not at a constitutional convention and not at a state legislature. So that's where I'd certainly depart from a lot of the Supreme Court's case law, is in substantive due process. I think it's a garbage concept. I think it was understood to be a garbage concept for a long time until about the 50s or 60s. It actually, most non-lawyers I don't think are very familiar with this history, but it actually emerged as a concept at the turn of the century during the industrial era. There's a case called Lochner v. New York, which I believe is in the first decade of the early 1900s. And that was a case that came up challenging New York state law labor regulations. Essentially, there were labor regulations that said bakeries couldn't employees work shifts of, I don't recall, but let's say 10 or 12 or 15 hours in a row. The Supreme Court was actually very conservative, very pro-business at the time. And it struck down this New York state law and said this is a violation of substantive due process. And what they meant by substantive due process was there is a right to contract. And for a state legislature, in this case, the New York state legislature, to say you cannot employ someone to work a 15-hour shift. That's a violation of the right to contract, and therefore is a violation of the 14th Amendment. That case law is actually the same line of thinking that leads to Roe versus Wade. This idea that there is a substantive right that it's the job of the courts to come in and enforce. So what was actually a pro-business, conservative legal doctrine on the court actually got turned around into being something that was used by the Warren Court to create the right of privacy, the right of abortion, and a number of these other things. That's where, again, as a lawyer, regardless of what you think about abortion, regardless of what you think about labor regulations, I think you have to look at that and say, the people should be able to decide what is a substantive right. The only job that the Constitution should be doing is making sure that if you're going to take a right, that it's done in a manner that is consistent with notions of due process that go all the way back to England: the right to a trial, the right to confront your accused, the right to presence of counsel. Anything beyond that, anything that is trying to identify a right that doesn't exist at law, that gives an opportunity for the Supreme Court to say, this is a new right, that I think is important. I think, any person that believes in democracy, any person that believes that the will of the people should prevail over a handful of lawyers in Washington, D.C., I think that should be opposed. So that's kind of my basic view on the 14th Amendment.
Okay. Well, that excellent synopsis there, Mr. Davis. Fantastic. And Annie, the floor is yours. We want to hear your thoughts on the 14th Amendment.
Well, I go back to the framers of the 14th Amendment and look at the speeches that they made around the time of the passing of it. And Jacob Howard came out and gave an explanation and said how the 14th Amendment was for slaves. Okay, so obviously this was a temporary measure because you couldn't bring and own slaves. You couldn't come over as a person here on a visa and bring slaves with you and continue to enslave them and say, but it's legal in my country, so I can legally own slaves here. Slavery was abolished in every form. So, well, this is a temporary, it was intended to be a measure that was, like you said, temporary to solve a problem and to prevent states from taking away the rights, the life, the liberty, and the property of very possibly slaves that would, as they acquired them. That did not stop states from instituting things like poll taxes and other things that made it very difficult for poor people to vote. And very often the system was set up to keep blacks poor. And it also, if you notice, it talked about male persons. So that's where women's rights came in after the 14th to include women along with this, that women could not be prevented from voting or having life, liberty. Women could inherit and own property at that point. But getting down basically,
Kathy, not to interrupt you, but women's rights and as far as them being legally allowed to vote and whatnot, that actually come above board to this country in 1920.
correct. So this 14th Amendment is prior to women voting. And so it specifically says males of a certain age. I think at that age it was 21. It wasn't 18. So there's been a lot of changes in our laws that have added and built onto the 14th Amendment. But we need to go back to the original intent. We need to look at what was in the mind of the people who created this. And when you go and look at the speeches, Howard specifically says this does not apply to foreigners or aliens, and it doesn't apply to Indian tribes. The reason that they didn't recognize Indian tribes is because they considered them their own sovereign nation, and that their loyalty was to their tribe and not the United States. And foreigners and aliens, they would be like tourists, visitors, or people that were just in our country, because it was so easy to just cross the border along the southern border or northern border, whether they be French Canadians or people from South America. They were automatically under the protection of the United States. Their presence on our land gave them protection from being set upon by citizens, unless those citizens had some reason to think that they were committing a crime. Then those citizens couldn't form a mob and rob them of due process. They had to be treated just like an American citizen and given due process. Under the jurisdiction clause, I think is extremely important, because that means to me, you've got to register with the U.S. You've got to sign the guest book. You've got to let us know you're here. When you sneak in illegally, your intent is not to be loyal to the United States and to uphold its laws. You've already committed a misdemeanor in the simple crossing. Many of them are committing felonies because they keep returning after we've deported them. So it's the manner of entry. If you signed the guest book, came through a port of entry, and claimed asylum, then you are subject under the jurisdiction thereof. However, I think we need immigration reform. We need to clarify that should your asylum claim be denied, any children that you had while you were waiting for your court date are going to be the citizens of either you're given asylum and they are also by extent given asylum, but you must complete the naturalization process to become a citizen. And when the parents complete it, I think the children that were born here automatically should complete it. Only those that were born in a foreign nation should have to become naturalized. But I think it's that citizenship to the children is only extended based on the status of the parents.
Very good. Very good exchanges here, people. This is fantastic. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add to any of this? I know Mr. Davis got something to add. I know that.
I would just kind of at a more general level, a lot of this comes to what we hear are called theories of interpretation about the Constitution, originalism versus there's a bunch of different names for it, but the living Constitution theory, things like this, that which we could say more liberal lawyers and Supreme Court justices believe in, that it should be adopted to meet modern ideas of fairness and rights. I would just kind of encourage people to consider that what we refer to as originalism is really just the way that law has been interpreted in any other context for thousands of years. Ricky, if you and I were to enter into a contract, right, and let's say it was a contract about services or whatever the case may be, and we were later on in a dispute, maybe years down the road, about what that contract meant, well, we would look at the meaning, we would look at the words in the contract, and we would look at what those words mean in context. That's all we would be doing. We would not be asking whether there is a more fair way to interpret it. We would not be asking what it means today. We would be asking what it meant at the time that we signed the dotted line on that contract.
That is correct.
That's fundamentally what originalism says about constitutional interpretation, is that we are trying to make sense of a legal document, as opposed to what? Well, making nonsense of the document. So people refer to as theories of interpretation. It's really just the way to interpret, and it's always been the way to interpret legal documents. What did it mean at the time that it was agreed to? That's all you're doing.
Mr. Davis, if I may, I'm curious to know if you have any political ambition for the future, or if you even want to answer that. We've talked about this over the years. Remember, I was going to run for something, and I wanted you as a campaign manager. You remember, but I also had made the recommendation to you that I think you should run for something because of your knowledge and the love of country that you have. So I'm just curious if you have any future intent on possibly running for a political office.
Right now I'm focused on my legal practice, and I just keep things one foot in front of the other right now.
Sure. Understood. And the thing is I just feel as though this amendment is not needed anymore, because, I think you both even said, it was written at a time. You got to look at what was going on at that time for this amendment to, come above board of the world. And, and when this thing was started and basically was written by the radical Republicans after the Civil War, you got to remember, I'm trying to remember the death toll of the Civil War. I want to say it was 155,000. And I think it was 175,000. We lost 58,000 in the Vietnam War. Okay. So, you had a lot of angry people. The entire South was burnt down for the most part. And then President Lincoln gets assassinated. Andrew Johnson becomes a president, and he couldn't get along with anybody. And he was trying to reverse a lot of what President Lincoln, had already passed. He was trying to reverse all that stuff. And there was really a mess going on at this time. And in 1868 was the same year that Andrew Johnson, the first president of the United States, got impeached. And that happened in 1868, the same year that this amendment was born, or ratified, I should say. So, things were not good in this country at that time. It was still really a mess. And of course, it was also the start of Reconstruction as well. But
I'd like to also point out in the original language, which is not in there was exclusionary clauses that this did not apply to diplomats, ambassadors, to people that were representatives of a foreign country. That's why we diplomatic immunity. Remember, they're not under our jurisdiction thereof, and Indians. And there would not, later, they would not have, and that Indians themselves. So therefore, that's the only people who were excluded from that. And that's where the interpretation that simply your presence upon our soil gave you birthright. And that is the interpretation that the Supreme Court or that others have assigned to it. But that doesn't mean that it was interpreted correctly. Therefore, challenged. It just has never been challenged.
Well,
Right.
let me ask you folks this. Now, I've already stated I believe that this particular amendment should be abolished, and I do not believe that birthright citizenship is good. I don't think it's good for this country. People want to come here, they need to come here legally. And so, if I may ask, Mr. Davis, do you believe that there should be an end to birthright citizenship in this country?
So I'm going to give a very lawyer answer to that. There's compelling arguments about why it should or should not. There is a principle in law that is important, that we call stare decisis, meaning that there's something that's been understood to mean a certain thing for an extended period of time, and to disrupt that is to disrupt what we call reliance interests, that certain people have been under the assumption that the law is going to be interpreted this way. So to go back to my contract example, we assume that the contract means one thing for 100 years. And then all of a sudden, just because somebody may be right, it gets changed. Well, that can disrupt things. It's like throwing a new species into a different ecosystem. That unintended consequences can result from that. I haven't looked into the question seriously enough to offer a strong opinion on that, to be quite honest. I mean, I definitely think it gets abused, and I definitely have serious concerns about it. So I will say that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, that's one thing I've always liked about you, Mr. Davis. You do your research on things. You don't. Now me, me. I have no affiliation to either of the two major political parties, and I'm an equal despiser of both. But I do tend to lean more to right values for the most part. I just am a big believer in what our founding father said, specifically President Jefferson. I know you know that one with me, and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But I think it's. I just don't feel as though we need it anymore. I don't feel as though we need it anymore. And I think that there's bigger and better things that this country needs to be worrying about and getting taken care of. I think some of the Trump administration's policies, I believe that some of them are good, and I do support some of them. Some of them I question.
Well, see, we disagree there. I think that I think it would be a bad idea to repeal the 14th Amendment. I do think that the case law around it should not be expanded, and the courts should do their best at trying to maintain a faithful interpretation of what the original public meaning is of the language in the 14th Amendment, just as they should with any other amendment or provision of the Constitution. For instance, take the issue of gay marriage. Personally, it is my personal belief that I don't think it's a good use of state resources to be criminally prosecuting people for gay marriage. That's just my personal opinion in terms of making it criminally unlawful. At the time that the 14th Amendment was passed, I don't have the statistics or the exact information in front of me, but I think it's fair to say that homosexuality was criminalized in a fair number of jurisdictions in this country. So when we're looking at what the original public meaning was of the 14th Amendment, I don't think it's possible to look at it and say, well, what part of this was enshrining the right to gay marriage. That certainly couldn't be true when that was a crime in a number of the jurisdictions that ratified the 14th Amendment. So again, while I don't think it's a good idea to criminally prosecute gay marriage, at the same token, I think you have to accept the fact that that was not part of what the 14th Amendment meant. and frankly, you can just read the text without even having to refer to those laws to understand that. So I don't think it needs to be repealed, but I do think that it does not need to be abused and expanded to things that it doesn't even say. Those are two different things.
Correct. But to speak about disruption, if the Supreme Court does come out in favor that this does, from reading the speeches, looking at the past and the history, and interpreting originality, what did this mean at the time that the amendment was passed? Who did it exclude? Okay. Well, do we have any amendments afterwards? Well, yes, we do. Do they override this? Yes. This portion has already been overridden from the next ones, from others that have passed, like women's suffrage. But women's suffrage only changed the language of the 14th to include women. It didn't add any additional rights other than that there were a class of people that were not being given their rights to vote, the rights to be citizens. The right for gay marriage is a totally different issue. What they're talking about here is your life, your liberty, and your property, not your pursuit of happiness, but your life, your liberty, or your property. So you couldn't take someone's life for being gay. You can't take their liberty away for being gay. You can't take their property away for being gay. But that does not mean, and that's where they like to include the pursuit of happiness into this. But that's not part of the wording of this. So like you said, Mr. Davis, expounding upon it to add additional special interest groups into this is not part of the original language. It's not part of we haven't had we'd have to have future legislation that dates back to this to create a special interest group like they did with women's suffrage.
Well,
so they have to do that.
I would go a step further to say that they actually would say that they could take your liberty, for instance, for being gay, if there was
they could throw you they could throw you in jail for it.
Right. If you were
But as far as
that's all it's saying is fair legal procedure. And that is where substantive due process rights come into place, which are a legal fiction.
And also keep in mind with interracial marriages in the South, that was illegal for decades after the Civil War. I mean, well into the 20th century.
Until the early
Yes, I think it was the 50s about when it got challenged in court.
51 or 52, yeah.
Virginia was in the 60s, I believe 64. I could be wrong on that.
Well, 64 was the year that President Lyndon Johnson passed the Civil Rights Bill, and he passed another one in 1965, and then he passed the new Voting Rights Act in 1968.
67 was Loving v. Virginia, which is what was the decision on interracial marriage. So yeah, until
and I mean that's insane. That's insane. That's over 100 years after the Civil War.
Well, I think the only ruling that the Supreme Court, they can wash their hands of it and just say it applies to anybody born on this soil, period. But that doesn't guarantee that the parents can't be deported. However, the child can always come back. And the parents cannot, to me, they cannot be administrators of any funds that these children would be entitled to, because they're not under the naturalization process. That's for what I call illegal aliens. Those who signed the guest book, got a green card, are in the process, made asylum claims, those are excluded. And I think that's what we need. The Supreme Court may even kick it down to Congress and say that you have to write a new immigration bill in order to clarify this. And these are the points of clarification that need, because this bill was written to cover slaves. And at the time, foreigners and aliens were excluded in this. Foreigners and aliens or ambassadors. So it's not just ambassadors. I mean, they created groups of who was excluded, and Indian tribes were as well. And there were only 2 groups that were excluded. Indian tribes were not mentioned. And
Yeah.
that's because in previous legislation they had already deemed them as being not citizens because they were loyal to their tribes and not to the U.S. They were their own sovereign. In other words, they're here and they've created their own sovereign nation. And because they're native to America, we can't throw them out. This is where they're from.
Okay. Was there anything else that anybody wanted to share here? All right. Well, I tell you what, I have to thank Mr. Davis for coming. I remember back in the early days, Annie, when we were doing Darley Routier, and before Mr. Davis went and pursued his legal career, he told me, goes, you know what I want you to do? He goes, I want you to do political podcasts. You remember telling me that, Mr. Davis?
I'm sure I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we have a lot of differences of opinion on things, but I think, the both of us are, we're more interested in, our societies and our country to be successful the way it was meant to be. And you'll find that, I mean, I've changed a lot of my stance on abortion rights, which, believe me, you would be pleased to hear them. Which we could do that on another podcast, because I know it gets you worked up, and for obvious reasons, because it's a terrible thing. But I mean, I'll do a podcast with you guys on it if you even want to go there, Mr. Davis. Like I said, I know you're not a real fan. You get worked up over it. A lot of people do, and but. We can talk about that some other time. There's millions of other subjects we can touch on. And I plan on eventually going through every president of the United States. I plan on doing extensive podcasts on the President Kennedy assassination. You know where I'm at with that, Mr. Davis. And so does Annie for the most part. I mean, she knows I know a lot about it. And anyway, I really hope that you can join us again, Mr. Davis. I get another subject matter, and then maybe we could put another date together. I'd love to have you back. I think your insight and your synopsis of the amendment, you made very, very good points. I'm really looking forward to people hearing them and seeing what they have to say about it. One thing about political podcasts, I'm not trying to change people's minds about anything. Okay, that's not what America is. But the free exchange of ideas is what made this country great. That was one of the big things that Charlie Kirk used to talk about, the free exchange of ideas, which I agreed with probably 95% of everything he said. I'm sure if I knew him on a personal level, I would have really liked him as a man and as an American citizen. His assassination is a horrible thing for this country. And for anybody to think that assassinations will make things better, there's never been an assassination in this country of a president or a political person, or even somebody like Charlie Kirk, who was just going to college campuses and expressing his freedom of speech for the most part, by killing people, all it does is make it worse. It makes it worse. It has always made it worse. And I couldn't believe when that happened. That was why I started doing these. I had been thinking about it for years. I know Mr. Davis knows that. I know Annie knows that. But when Charlie Kirk got assassinated, now you know me, Mr. Davis, I still don't watch television, even today. Have TVs, don't watch it. You know, I don't listen to a lot of news other than news that's very independent. You wouldn't catch me dead listening to CNN or Fox. You know, but so I'm very, you know, Sky News I'll watch a little bit, but all they do is lie. The point that I'm
Well,
making.
my heart goes out right now, Rich, because there has been a lot of violence in the past couple of days. My heart goes out to all the families of Brown University students who were injured, or faculty that were injured and killed at Brown University, as well as the horrible shooting that there was at the first day of Hanukkah celebrations on Bondi Beach in Australia, Sydney. It's very, very sad. It's taking political viewpoints and becoming violent is letting your passion and your feelings overrun common sense, because we can always work things out. We may not agree with things, but listening to other people's points of view is only going to help you either strengthen your own beliefs or questioning them. And if you question your beliefs, there's nothing wrong in changing them, or in letting them say, hey, I never thought about it from that angle, but yes, I see your point, and you could be right. I did want to ask Mr. Davis if my dates were correct. Isn't the Supreme Court going to hear the case about birthright citizenship in upcoming March of 2026?
I'm not sure of the status of that, so I will not misinform.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not going to put that out. I know it's upcoming. I think it's on the docket for March, but you know, with courts, they can always get delayed.
I had thought
or
that there
moved.
were arguments on that and that there was a decision forthcoming, but I could be wrong. So everybody should please look that up.
Yeah, you'll have to do your own fact checking on that. But prayers and my thoughts are with you for all the victims of recent violence that have been on the news.
And you know, I mean, you know me, Mr. Davis. I never went to college, and to be honest with you, Annie, I don't know if you ever went to college or not, but I know Mr. Davis has. So this is why I'm asking this or making this point here, and because I believe it's true. Do you believe that the colleges across this country, their agendas are basically indoctrinating or sheep dipping students towards socialism, communism, and this mass hate campaign that they have going on for people that have a different opinion or view of what they have? Would you agree, or do you believe that a lot of these college campuses are responsible for that?
So I think that the staff lounges at colleges and universities across this country have a lot of blame that should be laid at their feet for ideas in this country. You know, one thing that I think is fortunate is that the rebellious kids of today are actually rebelling against a lot of that. And so, you know, what was once seen as the rebellious or cool thing to do was to adopt a liberal point of view. It's actually the opposite now. And the man, so to speak, is the proverbial woke Karen that is at the college lecture hall, and the rebel outlaw student is the one who is expressing some of the ideas that have been expressed here. So while I do think that colleges and universities have a lot of blame for spreading these ideas, I think it's also the case that students are capable of thinking for themselves, and we're seeing some of that now.
Yeah.
I think colleges are far too political. That they have, in the sense that they were highly conservative at one time and seemed to, during the 60s, start going through changes to make a more liberal voice heard. The more liberal voice took over, and colleges encouraged it because they wanted to be fair and balanced. But in the sense of fairness and balance, you cannot silence the other side. You have to have equal representation. And depending on the geographic location and the demographics of the population, you're going to find a lot more woke or liberal colleges in areas where more liberals are concentrated, such as Berkeley.
Annie's
Berkeley,
and the left-wing activists, they used the principle of free speech in the 50s, 60s, 70s to get equal representation in college faculties, and then they turn their back on that principle, right? They use this idea of getting different viewpoints to assume power in an institution, and then they shut it down. So they're fully capable of using those principles to their advantage, but the moment that they take charge of an institution, they discard it then, which we that's a pretty common tactic with, let's just say, Marxist movements. It's a Leninist way of approaching institutions, to use their ideas of the institution against the institution, and then to totally capture it and shut everybody out. And so there certainly have been those attempts in college campuses.
Well, the thing is, as far as socialism is concerned, or even Marxism, communism, whatever you want to call it, it's pretty much all the same. Anywhere it's ever been installed throughout the planet, it has failed. It has failed. It is a system that does not work. And, you know, I see a lot of these young people, even grown adults, even people my age, like in their 50s or whatnot, you know, oh, well, I think it'd be so good if we could just try some of that. So why would you want to do that? Why would you not want to be able to self-sustain yourself? You know,
well, my biggest and simplest argument is we fought the Civil War to outlaw slavery. Communism makes everyone a slave to the government. They tell you that you own everything, but if you don't have control over it, you don't actually own it. So who owns everything? The government. Who has all the power? The government. How are you ever going to stand up against a nameless, faceless beast as an individual? You can't. That's why it's false, because it makes the people a slave of the government. That's in essence what it does. It's a 3-card Monte card game. You think you're following the P under the shell, but it's never there. They remove the P while you're not looking, because no matter what you choose, you'll never win.
Well, I mean, look, our government's already too big. It's way too big. I used to talk to Mr. Davis about this stuff years ago, almost on a daily basis. We talk always. I don't think a day ever went by we didn't talk about something political, you know. But you know, we talk about the Darlie Routier case. We would talk about politics. We talked about both of them quite frequently, and you know, my stance is still the same. I don't even think we need like things like the Department of Education, which, I mean, President Trump is trying to do away with it for the most part. I don't think we need the Department of Energy, and I still say we don't need Department of Homeland Security. It's, I mean, just with that, the money that would be saved is just insanely, you know, a large amount of money.
Well, it's not even just the money. Let me part on this thought to tie up a few things that Annie was saying earlier about political violence, and if the government is all powerful, and you lose in the political process, right? Your ideas lose, and another faction or another point of view comes into power. Well, it really is a zero-sum game. And violence maybe is logical in that sort of scenario, right? If the government has all power to do anything it wants, there's no such thing as a limited government, then that's where you have political violence. So I think that's why, we have this idea of a limited government, a government that can only have so much say-so in our lives, because if the government can control every single aspect of our lives and your point of view loses, it's a zero-sum game. And that does encourage violence. And so I think that's one more point on the side of limited government.
Yeah, well, that was something President Thomas Jefferson definitely wanted to see happen in this country, and which did under his presidency and before and after. So, but it's not quite the same, I'm afraid, but not even close. But I don't think he'd be very pleased with the way a lot of ways or things are going. I don't think he'd be very pleased. I don't think any of the founding fathers would be, to be honest with you. But
Rich, have you read the newest bill that's going on Trump's desk? All 3,100 pages of it.
which bill was that?
The one that's on his desk, because Congress has slipped in some stuff that actually takes away power from the executive office and gives it to themselves, as well as aligns us with NATO and EU to have veto power over us. I don't like it. I think there's sections in it. I don't think it needs to be signed. I think those need to be taken out because they're contrary to American Constitution. They're not constitutional. And I don't think Congress should be able to degrade the powers of any other office. They can't strip the powers of the judicial, and they can't strip the powers of the president. They have their own.
Well, our founding fathers wanted the Congress to have the most power. And they did.
And they do. They do. They have the powers of creating bills and laws, and they can override a president with enough votes. And they have the power of the purse. He who controls the money controls a lot more than the other two. So, yes, Congress, but the way it was set up gives Congress more power.
The thing that makes me very upset about the Trump administration, and I'm not saying he's the only one, is this, every time he wants to do something, let's sign an executive order. That's ridiculous. He's done hundreds.
That's because Congress can't get their shit together and create a law. Look at how bad immigration laws have been for over 100 years, and nobody's done a damn thing about it.
I'm not going to disagree with what you said. What I'm going to say is that's not how our system works. So
but unfortunately, unfortunately, they don't get shit together.
I like to use President Reagan for an example. All right, and he became president in 1981, and in 1981 he was dealing with a Democratic Congress that was totally against his tax cuts, but he had the ability to communicate. That's what President Reagan had. He had the ability to communicate. That's why he's called the great communicator. And he was able to talk to these senators and congressmen, and they passed that bill. Democrats passed that bill. And amongst other things as well, that Democrats, you wouldn't catch him dead signing something like that now. But it was because President Reagan knew how to talk to people. Now, President Trump, this is my opinion, I don't think he's got that great a communication skill, to be honest with you. I don't think he has presidential communication skills, in my opinion. I'm not saying that I don't think that he's right about a lot of things that he says, because I think he is right about a lot of things that he says. But he just don't have that ability to communicate correctly to try to get the things done. And you're right Annie. As far as the Congress is concerned, I'm not pleased with them at all either. Mr. Davis, before we stop the episode here, can you comment on any of this?
Yeah, I think Annie's right, and I agree with a lot of what she said. And
I do too, but I'm just not big on that executive order stuff.
no, I'm not either. The framers assumed that the three branches of government would be
That's
just
right.
of their power and would act institutionally as the legislature or as the executive and as the judiciary. I think the judiciary, particularly the present Supreme Court, has behaved the most honorably and the most consistent with their oaths of office. I think the judiciary has really held this country together over the past decade.
Yeah,
but Congress does not want to do their job. They do not.
I agree.
Their powers as an institution. They allow the president to work from the bully pulpit and align themselves entirely on partisan lines rather than on institutional lines. And that the framers frankly did not anticipate it going exactly that way. And so it's a breakdown in the framework.
Yeah, I think they need to do something about all that executive order crap. I mean, case in point, Joe Biden did it. Trump's done it twice. He's really doing it this second time. And imagine, what they can do with those executive orders to turn this country upside down if you get the wrong person in there? At least if you're going through the Congress and somebody's getting way too far out of line or something, whether it be to the right or to the left, now you got a wall with the Congress to deal with. But with an executive order, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, tariffs are a good example.
No.
It's too
Well, if the EO is within the president's powers of his office, but like Joe opening the borders, that no Republican challenged it in court and said we have existing laws that Congress had already passed, and he doesn't have the authority to change the law. And they could have, but it was never challenged. No one challenged it in court the proper way, that it was unconstitutional, that his powers of EO did not extend to changing the law. And we already had laws about immigration. And yes, he could open the borders to immigration, in the fact that there's no number or quota. We will accept as many applications as people want to give, does not give them the right to come in and to appear at a port of entry and claim asylum.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you.
If they are claiming, if we're having this mass exodus, then there needs to be an investigation. Exactly as Kamala Harris said, get down to the root cause. Okay, where are all these people coming from? Do we have a war breaking out there? Are these refugees? Are these, why are we getting asylum claims? Are we seeing examples of them just shooting citizenry and they're just packing up and leaving? Then that's asylum, because that's a government that is oppressing its people. It can't be that you're trying to escape poverty or crime that's in your country, even if your government is corrupt and in cahoots with the criminals. It's still that government power. You have to rise up against your own government.
Well, I believe the reason why Joe Biden let all them people in here like that is because he knew they would be Democratic voters. Okay, that's what.
Right. He tried to, as far as they couldn't use other means, so they had to pack just like they want to pack the courts, they want to pack the United States and that turned so many Democratic voters who had been gone through here the system properly to vote Republican for Trump. And to tell you the truth, the midterms are going to be the telling point as to whether or not this is another 2 years of let's impeach Trump, or whether we can, if we get enough Republicans in there to carry the House and the Senate, then we can start passing bills. Because they're going to have to start passing bills. They're going to have to do immigration reform. They're going to have to do health care reform, major things to to get this country back on an even keel. And once those laws are passed, then the majority of Trump's EOs will go away, because they'll go away with his presidency unless another president comes in there and reverses it. Once it's an executive order, it can only be struck down by another president.
Well,
So that's
I
why
mean,
he had to close the border and make so many border EOs in regards to it, to undo what Joe had done.
oh, I mean, he was horrible. I mean, definitely the worst president of my lifetime. Let me think. I don't know. The Bush clowns were pretty bad too. And President Carter, I mean, he was definitely a good man, but he just didn't understand the economic system of this country. And I mean, he didn't know what to do. And it was a mess when he got in, and then everything that he did made it worse. And very sad. I mean, he was a good man. His intentions were well for the country and stuff like that. But man, he even admitted in the latter end of his life that he knew he was a failed president. And
What I think is so hilarious is so many people think LBJ was a great civil rights president.
oh my God,
He was one of the biggest. He was the biggest.
we ever had.
He was one of the biggest racists. The only person more crooked than LBJ was his daddy. And my grandparents were from the county that he grew up in, and his daddy and his daddy before him controlled so much stuff. They were just so corrupt and so evil, that it's just ridiculous. I honestly think the only reason that JFK picked him as a running mate was because he desperately needed the votes that LBJ could bring in.
Well, yeah, Kennedy knew that he needed to win Texas to win the election, because he knew it was going to be close, and indeed it was. And but him and Johnson hated one another. They hated one another, and RFK Sr. really hated Lyndon Johnson. And I mean, they used to make fun of one another, swear at one another. And I know President Johnson didn't like President Kennedy either. And JFK was going to drop Lyndon Johnson off the 64 ticket. And Lyndon Johnson got wind of that, and I find it rather interesting that weeks later, in my hometown here in Dallas, Texas, he gets assassinated out in the middle of the street. So I know Johnson had a hand in on that, and I know Dick Nixon had a hand in on it. So, good bad time. 60s were a bad time. Well, I should say the mid to latter end of the 60s were a bad time, not the very beginning of the 60s. So, but anyway, we're over on time. Tell me, Mr. Davis, will you join us next time?
I can't say next time, but I may be willing to come back if schedule lines up and everything, and just let me know.
Yeah, that'd be great. Love to have you back. And anyway, we're going to go ahead and get this closed down here. This will get posted a little bit later, and I'll send both of you the link as to when it's actually put on my channel. Like I always say, never forget the words of the late, great President Thomas Jefferson: stay vigilant, question your government. And that dissension is always the greatest form of patriotism. Have a good day, everybody.
Take care, Ray.
You bet.